Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Peter Stjanovic and this is Into the Metaverse, Opportunities for Technology Leaders. Now I'm going to start with you, Eileen. Can you just give us a bit of insight into what your thoughts are on the Metaverse? So how have you translated the Metaverse and its potential for technology?
What a fantastic question. Firstly, thank you, Peter, for having me in this discussion. Hi, everyone. How am I interpreting Metaverse and what does it mean for me? I actually don't think it's anything groundbreaking, I'll be honest. I think there are lots of metaverses or businesses that are calling themselves a metaverse. I think we need to be careful with the term the metaverse, because that implies all of these metaverses are joined together somehow and it is just one ecosystem. So from my perspective, from the outside looking in, I actually think it's where all of these technologies are brought together to have achieve better outcomes or better experiences. A lot of it's about a feeling and accessibility, making it more inclusive. But I do think that those things come at a cost. I think we would want to be a bit careful. So I'm watching it carefully from the outside, a little bit of a cynic in terms of when they say the metaverse. I don't know that we're there yet, but there are lots of metaverses that exist.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. A cautious start. Ian, what are your thoughts? And maybe particularly on the potential for different experiences between people.
Okay, so I was going to ask you what would be our definition for the metaverse today, but then I thought that wouldn't be right, so I looked up what an online definition was for the metaverse, and then to bear out Eileen's points, this isn't necessarily new, is it? It's sort of something about interactive virtual experience between people and things, and I do have a slightly also slightly skeptical views to the metaverse, because I think sometimes these things can be branded and opportunistic for an organization to to scoop up all possible applications. But it has been around for some time, hasn't it? I mean, people have Oculus Rift, and surgeons have been working with virtual reality or different views of things, and we've talked in the past about digital twins and ways people can interact digitally. As to what it means for people, I think at the moment we might be thinking about the metaverse in terms of avatars and how we interact with each other. And I did sound out some peer CIOs last night on this topic, knowing I was going to be having this discussion today. And people said that where they'd had some experiences in the metaverse in meetings like this, it hadn't necessarily at this stage been very favorable, because people are even more abstracted from the personal interaction than we would be looking at a screen. It's not to say it won't evolve and it's all a matter of time before finding the great use cases. I think pretty much everyone I asked said they'd had some interaction or some experience, but that was more like an experiment that hadn't been repeated. So perhaps it's early days to see what the metaverse will bring.
Interesting, and also it comes into question some of the definitions that the metaverse provides, given this context. Juan, at Imperial though, is this metaverse something that either your students are talking about, or maybe some of the researchers are considering? What are the conversations you're hearing?
Yeah, so it's very much there as part of the conversation we're having on a day-to-day basis. It's being kicked into very much the front page for us through, especially last year when Mark Zuckerberg renamed Facebook Meta, and that brought it into us, created a whole bunch of interest. But I think we're still inventing it, we're still experimenting. It isn't something that you can probably define very, very clearly. We're learning how to what the opportunities are, how we can leverage those opportunities. In a simple form, we can see how we could have a university in the metaverse and deliver lots of teaching and research through the metaverse or a metaverse. But for that to be useful, we need the metaverses to be able to interact and talk to each other. We need to have some form of digital currency. So it's really difficult to see where it's going to go into the future. I think now it's really evolving from a lot of gaming and the gaming platform. So we have all kinds of immersive games where you go online. There's platforms like Roblox that went public last year, and they're absolutely amazing ways to develop all these immersive experiences. But in terms of business, it's really difficult at the moment to see where the value is. There's obviously organizations out there that are experimenting. Nike has created a whole bunch of virtual goods and
Nike always seem to sort of just get the cusp of things and
so
and roll
early
with
adopters
it.
and
Yes.
so we don't think we'll be an early adopter in that space. We when the pandemic started, we looked at Outspace VR, where and we thought, can we create a virtual experience and an engaging experience for our students through some virtual world, and we did a little bit of a proof of concept, but it was not really as engaging as we thought it would be.
Early days.
Very, very early days. So I don't think we'll be an early adopter in that.
And your earlier point about connecting different metaverses calls what Eileen said about being careful about calling it the metaverse, because we're not there yet.
Yes, we're not there.
It's still isolated pockets, for want of a better word. Freddie, Juan said it's probably quite early days yet in the business context to think about the potential for the metaverse and experiences. Have you seen any insights to the contrary? Any clear front horses?
I do share, the sentiment that's been put out there already. Because, by the way, this is not the first time that we've heard yet of another buzzword that is going around, right? And if you look at throughout our career, there's a lot of technology that's come and gone before us. There has been a lot of false dawns, right? But on the other hand, we've also been surprised by many things that has just happened. For example, I remember when I was, building the next generation platform for my company for the internet. And then the next day, just before launch, the tablet came along. And they asked me, what is this? And I said, I have no idea, right? And then suddenly, that tablet thing became the mobile thing. And so I think if you look throughout the history of technological advancements, even Bill Gates, when he had the vision of saying we're going to build a mobile phone where you can do personal computing on a phone, he had the vision, but he did not make that happen. Right? So I think part of the answers is not going to necessarily come from any one of us, because right now it's not a thing, right? A thing becomes a thing when everybody knows about it. Right now, it's not really a thing, and therefore, it's just all of us speculating, having different views on things, right? But that time will come whereby, because of the way, again, the technology industry has evolved, that critical mass would happen, and that critical mass would then evolve an outcome and a result and a thing that we will all be surprised by. So, yes, I share the cynicism, but I also share the excitement that this potentially may be something new, especially when Meta has invested how much? 180 billion? Or planning to. So we cannot discount that level of investment.
I mean, they even changed their name, Freddie, so it tells you everything.
Would that thing be a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes, exactly.
No surprises.
Exactly. But you've also raised some really interesting points. And Freddie, when you talk about those products or shifts that did change the nature of things, it was all because of the experience. So, in that context, maybe experience is the connecting thread between all of those unpredictable changes that we've all gone through. Now, Leon, Elsewhen's all about the experience. So when you think of the metaverse and its potential on the experience, do you think this is all speculative still, or have you seen potentials that certain businesses have already capitalized on?
I think it's interesting from a business perspective because it's certainly an emergent trend. And I agree with everybody here that this is something that is, still taking shape. But there's kind of key themes that start to emerge around that. And I think they're very interesting. And I think that the reason that there's so much kind of uptake and hype and kind of, Facebook is almost forcing us into that world is because we are looking for the next paradigm. Like you said, we had the internet, the mobile revolution. We never knew what that's going to cause and where it's going. And we see that there are changes in technology that are potentially becoming the next paradigm shift. So we, as a society, we learn to kind of, notice these things. So we're trying to understand where is that going. So a particular specific, huge, successfully, and meaningful changes that this brought to businesses. There are areas that you can see that happening. There's companies that are setting up themselves around capturing value. There's kind of, I would say that Metaverse is much bigger than just virtual environments where, there's kind of Web3 themes, there's kind of ownership. Juan mentioned there's a few key themes around here, and I think businesses are looking at how they can capture that.
And if therefore it is still early days, everyone, and perhaps the speculation is rife with what the next 10 years looks like, is there anything happening now that we could draw lessons upon? Maybe, I think, Juan, you talked about gaming. Some of the metaverse implications around gaming has been transformative, and around maybe the VR aspects around education, of course. But has anyone across this roundtable seen anything that particularly sparked their interest and curiosity in regards to the experience that you yourself found and how you could use that to benefit your customer or clients or employee base?
I'm happy to jump in here, from being long time in publishing and now in education, right? The two things that struck me was that, it's about the content, right? It's also about the language. So if you talk about trying to create an inclusive world, right? Those two things are still getting in the way, because if it's only in English language, either the content or the language, then it stops. But if the potential of this technology is that, for example, one of the things I've come across is that, it's trying to develop this capability that allows you to get instantaneous language translation. That in itself is amazing, right? So almost real time, maybe the day will come where it's real time. We're having this conversation in English, but somebody else that is joining us will be listening to that in their own language in the way that they can relate to. So that for me is one really good possibility that I'd like to see happen.
I think the gaming piece is really important. So I think that there is a lot of I'm a gamer, and a typical gamer is a mid-30s woman. Actually, that's kind of a profile of a typical gamer. Yeah, because if you look at mobile gaming as well, it's this sort of wave of cultural trend has not entered the workforce as much as others did. True. And there's a generation that is growing on coming from these environments and feeling very comfortable with them. So how will this affect our workforce and how we do work and how we communicate as a business and how we do business? I think what you said about communication is very interesting because, again, in gaming has been transcending cultures. People have friends across the globe that they actually never spoke to before beyond gaming, and there's sometimes friends over years and years and years. So how this new medium of communicating is going to come into other aspects of life, I think is an interesting shift.
And I suppose one of the other benefits of talking about such a nascent trend is that we can deliberate on the ethics before it actually enters into society proper, which is quite a rare thing to do at the moment. We normally think about ethics after the fact. So with everything we've thought about, what then should we focus on when considering the ethical implications of something as all-consuming as the metaverse?
So about policing, let's just think a little bit about where we seem to be generally headed towards metaverse and social interactions. We talked a bit about gaming because we've had metaverse type situations before where we could model things and use digital models for various things. So if we're going towards like the social side of things, it's going to draw out presumably the best and the worst of human nature, isn't it? Like any other platforms. So it's going to be the same question as what do we do about trolls or people that can have extreme interactions because perhaps they feel it's a less interpersonal experience. People can say or do whatever they want without thinking of the implications of the feelings on other people. But maybe there are other extreme examples. I'm not just trying to be a skeptic. Other extreme examples where it could induce extreme empathy, but I'm not sure what those scenarios are. I don't know how it would be policed because it's going to amplify the same difficulties that we're seeing at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and these are good discussion points. I wonder then, how do you as tech leaders bring about these conversations in senior leadership teams discussions or strategy discussions if the metaverse does have the promise that it promises, whether it's on policing, whether it's on its application for education, etc. How do you recommend initiating these types of discussions with your peers in the business?
It's a massively challenging question to answer, I think. Very interesting question and clearly needs to be answered, but it's incredibly complex because if I think of the metaverse as the evolution of the internet, as Ian was saying, and the evolution of how we interact socially with each other through these kind of virtual worlds that we create, it's a very different paradigm that we have right now. And in those virtual worlds, you can also yourself be different personas, right? You can be different avatars, you can be different things, because you're not just limited to VR or AR glasses. The metaverse is about any device, and so it's your next experience. But it feels like a very different experience than what we have now through social networks, through when you insult someone on Twitter or when you harass someone on Facebook. This feels completely different. It feels like a complete paradigm shift. And we already had cases of harassment, haven't we, on these virtual worlds that have been created. And I think it's an impossible ask to have one organization or one person policing this virtual environment. So somehow we're going to have to figure this out as we go along a little bit. I wish I had a few of the answers. I am concerned about the future and some elements as to what's that going to do to us as human beings and how we're going to take those human interactions forward if we're going to be expanding, breaching the physical and that with the virtual world.
I do have a view on this. I think, because in my spare time, I do a piece of research into IT leadership, right? And one of the interesting things is that, if you look at our roles, it keeps evolving. The word ethics and being an ethical leader is coming into our responsibility. But, now, especially now with COVID, digital technologies we do have a social responsibility, right? So things that has happened before, it happened, and then we try to recover, deal with the consequence. Now we have a chance to think a bit harder about the consequence before we let it happen. So I think part of it has to be policing is the sort of the wrapper that allows us to think about that issue. But we got to think about it also from our personal responsibility as a leader. What can we do? What should we do in terms of guiding those conversations and guiding what's happening out there? I think we have a responsibility.
Very different paradigm shift, and I think we're probably talking about something that's evolving and that's got to materialize. Yeah. Right now, Facebook can put filters so that you don't insult someone or say eliminate this leader in another country or whatever, and they can remove those filters. But if we shift the paradigm to creating an avatar, to being a persona, you can't really censor that conversation, can you? Because that conversation is happening much more real time in those worlds. And so that's the difficulty that I have in understanding how you will do that.
So maybe then, in a business context, when preparing for the metaverse or metaverses, we should be thinking about the right questions we should be asking rather than trying to figure out any answers now. So in that regard then, what for you as leaders right now then are some of the most obvious questions you should be asking yourselves or your teams or perhaps even your customers maybe, to understand what if they want this from you? Where should we be starting? Leon, do you mind cutting into this first?
Yeah, I would love to actually.
What are the key questions, do you think?
Well, I think our job is to help leaders think beyond the BAU, think about what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to improve. And I think this is an interesting subject because this is an emerging trend. And I think we should be thinking about how this affects our business, how our processes are going to be changing, what are expectations of our new wave of customers, new wave of employees. And I think the points around ethics are so important because the word policing, at the moment, the internet is being policed by corporates. So if you think about the emergence of the internet that I used to log into 15 years ago and the internet now are two very different places. And the policing now is done by corporates. And one of the reasons we're having these conversations is because they failed. And, we've seen a lot of negative kind of experiences coming out of what Facebook and et cetera have been doing. And that's why it's so live in our discourse. And I think this kind of, I don't think it's a technology thing. It's not about metaverse or the internet. This is part of kind of us becoming a technology society. How do we deal with it? And I loved what you said, Freddie, about us as leaders. We should be thinking about that. It becomes our personal responsibility of how we shape technology in our organization, how we build new products and services, how we affect our employees. I think there is a personal responsibility that we all have to take to, to think about these things. But the answer, I don't think we have the answer yet. Is it the regulator that is a lot more sophisticated? Is it actually part of the, what's embedded in the metaverse, which is the decentralization and the ownership? Is that part of the answer, moving away from corporates doing the job, but us doing the job? I don't know. But it's definitely something we should be thinking about.
Thanks, Leon.
So the policing question is a very interesting one, isn't it? And we can go around thinking of who would be the regulators, or how would the companies regulate or police their environment. But then all the interactions are so incredibly rich and social in nature, aren't they? And interactive. That it's kind of really then does become, as we're discussing, an ethics, but a societal question, how we deal with it as a society. And Freddie made a really good point about how we can be prepared ahead and try and understand the consequences, good or bad, of all these new experiences. So it just seems to me really important that we understand, why are we going to be using the metaverse? There might be really incredibly good reasons, but therefore, understanding why we're using it, and are we not just using it because we're getting hooked or addicted by some quick gratification, quick experience or fun that we get from it, or if that is all we're getting in some instances, to understand that, but no, our data is not being used for another different commercial purpose.
And
it's quite complex, isn't it?
It is, and that goes back to what Eileen was saying in, what would stop people from embracing the metaverse? Maybe it's about the privacy and the data that's quite a big topic now for consumers as well as big enterprises. I wonder, therefore, whether this roundtable should have been into the metaverse responsibilities for tech leaders, I suppose.
In fact, if I may jump in here, I think the question Eileen was alluding to, right? Sometimes you can look at the best stuff, but the question that we can ask is, it's not just about the benefits, right? Because that's what we all do to create products and sell services. But the responsibility part is about, but what are we doing about safeguarding? Let's say if there's one dimension, right? And the safeguarding is our responsibility when we design that product and services. So that has to come from within, right? Because everybody can only do their own thing. But if you are providing that, what are you doing to make sure that you address that issue also?
Okay, last question then all, and then we'll close for the round table. Do you think this is the paradigm shift that it's promised to be?
So personally, I think so. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. A lot of things need to happen in the meantime. I think there's the open metaverse conversation, and these different worlds need to connect to each other. We need to be able to create these digital economies that Leon was talking about, because without that digital economy, you can't buy something in Fortnite and then take it to somewhere else with you, and so you're living in that space. But I think this is inevitable. I think this will happen. As to the pace and the shape and the form that it will take, and how it will evolve from this gaming type of platform that we have now, these immersive games that start to talk and interconnect to each other, how it then becomes an extension of our own reality, and how we create those digital economies. But it is going to happen, because there's massive shifts. The Roblox experience right now, it's absolutely amazing. It's an incredible platform where it's not only a gaming platform, but also for creators, where they create all of these kind of games. I think I was reading somewhere last year there were $50 billion exchanged in digital goods.
Wow.
In all these different worlds. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of momentum behind this, and it's become since last year, it's very much part of the conversation we're all having right now across all sectors of technology.
Excellent. Eileen, we're just talking about whether we think the metaverse, despite everything we discussed, is actually the paradigm shift. Yes or no from you? What do you think?
Not yet.
Excellent.
I'm happy to give you a longer answer. I think that yes, for some things, definitely. But I think we just need to be a bit careful going forward. We need to be careful that we don't exclude people. We need to be careful that We're aware of the unintended consequences. We need to be careful it doesn't drive the wrong behaviour. We need to be careful about almost permitting crime and illegal activities as a result of embracing a metaverse. So yes, for some things, definitely, but not for everything, not yet.
I think it's down, I think Ian mentioned it earlier on, it's down to the definition, right? So for example, we like to measure things, KPIs and all those things. So if I were to think of what is the one measure that potentially can help, is that, you know, the whole point of this is that it gives you a more immersive experience. So if we can find a way to measure that, then maybe that's how we would know whether we're going to get on. By the way, that's a very crude thing I just said there. The point here is that I would agree it's not yet, but I do see the potential of us going there. I have no idea when it's going to happen.
Okay. Now, Ian, you're one of the cynics at the beginning. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think in some form, however we define it, the metaverse and how we use it likely will result in a paradigm shift. But as with all the other things, if you look about the things that did result in the paradigm shift, it's not quite as we expect it might be at the outset. And I think this is why we just need to be very, very thoughtful as we get into something where it's taking us. Everything changed in the last 20 years, and the seeds of the change, they didn't seem like they were creating a paradigm shift at the time, and something else happened.
Absolutely.
It's hard to predict.
You're right. That prediction is always going to be hard to do. And let's lastly fall on Leon. What are your final thoughts on the debate and the potential for the metaverse?
Well, I'm a technophile, so I think about technology very optimistically. I think that what I see is there's a big shift in a few themes around kind of centralization, ownership, and our relationship with the virtual. Our consciousness is kind of migrating to the virtual. It started with the mobile phone. It started with our relationship with social and with kind of virtual representations of ourselves. There's a really big shift. I don't know what is going to be the end result of it. And for me personally, again, from a technology standpoint, the piece that is really missing is the hardware. We don't have the hardware that can support the type of vision that Mark Zuckerberg is trying to sell us. You know, his whole piece was a giant pre-rendered virtual, virtual kind of background. The hardware piece is really missing. But I think if we unlock the hardware piece and we can have this seamless experience of the virtual, it's going to change everything for us.
Excellent. Well, if I could condense that into a short sentence, maybe the opportunity then really is to consider what the safeguarding proposals for an equitable metaverse is before we actually get to the position of the metaverse, which is almost a very unusual position to have actually when given something of this grand scale. So hopefully that's something for us all to take away from. But thank you all for your time and experience and insights today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for watching. This has been The Studio and Into the Metaverse, Opportunities for Technology Leaders.